Nurses of psych wards. What did a patient do that left you speechless? Probably the saddest was a resident I had a long time ago. This gentleman was a World War II vet with Alzheimer's and dementia. Probably once or twice a month he would relive some battle he was in. He would literally run up the hallway and grab you and yell at you to get down behind the sandbags. Then he would tell you to take his Thompson because it was too heavy for him. He would just use a pistol. Then he would get up and run back down the hallway. This guy was old, and seeing him full sprint like that up and down the hallway during one of his episodes was surreal. I can't imagine having to constantly relive the worst moments of your life where you witnessed and survived the unspeakable horrors of war. A very cheery one to start us off, although I have a feeling it's not going to get much better. Story 2. We had a gero psych floor. Crazy old people. One night while passing through, a little old lady popped her head out her doorway and said to me, "I sure could use the company of a good-looking young man tonight." Sorry, I'm not that good-looking. Quick as snot on a doorknob, she said, "That's okay, I can't see too well." I didn't join her, but her charisma was on point. Story 3. When I was in nursing school, I had a clinical in the state-funded psych ward downtown. I was assigned to sit with this one girl to monitor her behavior. She spent about 30 minutes doing nothing but eating pudding cups with a plastic spoon. She ate like 6 of them in half an hour. Then, out of nowhere, she very calmly licked her spoon completely clean and pulled her shirt sleeve up, before shoving the entire spoon into an incision in her arm near her bicep. Then, very calmly said, "Oops." The nurses that worked there didn't believe me. They kept saying I was making it up and I couldn't have seen what I saw. Only later on, like 4 hours later, it was a 12-hour clinical, the orderly noticed the girl had some blood on her shirt. He took her into her room to change her clothes, and noticed that an incision on her arm had dehisced and had begun bleeding. Then eventually agreed to send her to the hospital for testing. The x-ray showed the entire spoon sucked into the fat of her upper arm, through an incision where they had removed a birth control implant the week before. Apparently, the girl had slowly been picking at the sutures and opening it bit by bit until it was deep enough to fit an entire plastic spoon. The girl admitted that the oops was because it had gotten sucked in and couldn't be pulled out, not because she stuck a spoon in her arm. Totally bizarre. Story 4. We had a psych patient on our floor that wasn't really crazy, just confused and unpleasant in general. And per usual, he started yelling about me poisoning him. I explained what it was and that we're all here to help him, not hurt him, and he responds with, "I'm just going to die." His vitals were fine, he was alert, no red flags, and like I said, he was always pretty unpleasant, so I didn't think much of it. Sure as hell, he coded an hour later and we never got him back. Story 5. My sister was actually sectioned earlier this year for her eating disorder. She shouldn't have been, but that's a story for another time. And she was right next to the PICU, Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit. One of the nights she heard multiple screams coming specifically from that ward. One of the patients had bit a chunk out of a nurse's leg as they were trying to detain them. They then started eating said chunk. It's crazy to think these types of things happen. Story 6. Not a nurse, but I was a patient in a psych ward. The ward was sectioned into 2 sides based on case severity. I was on the less severe side. One night, an incredibly tall, somewhat muscular man escaped his room on the severe side, got through a door that was supposed to be locked, got into the less severe side and into my room. I woke up, sat up, and saw him standing in my doorway. He asked in a shaky voice if I was all right. I hesitantly said yes, to which he responded by getting a look of terrified horror and screaming, "I knew it! You can see them too, don't let them get you!" before he was dragged away screaming by security. Story 7. Was interviewing a guy in a psych ward and he was complaining about how he couldn't have any whiteout, a liquid eraser for typewriters, because he was on unalive watch. Claimed it was stupid because if he wanted to unalive himself, as he pointed out, he could use the drawstring from the blinds to hang himself, or he could use his pencil to stab himself, or use a typewriter metal bar to off himself. I agreed it was silly to hold back the small bottle of liquid whiteout. When I relayed the convo to my instructor about how silly it seemed due to him having several other ways, she replied that he proved to me that he had been considering ways to unalive himself, and that's why he was able to come up with so many so quickly. He never did get his whiteout. Story 8. I visited a prison for a warden job and went to see the constant surveillance guys for their own safety, etc. There was a fellow there who had used a razor to slice his stomach open and started pulling chunks of himself out for fun. He also started using the hole, which wouldn't heal, as a hiding place. A towel was found stuffed in there which his body had started fusing to. Apparently he was quite nice, but the whole thing wasn't for me, and I didn't go ahead with applying. Oh, I can't imagine why OP didn't want to apply there. Sounds like a dream job. Story 9. Not me, but my dad used to work in Airedale and J Ward, Australian insane asylum and prison for the criminally insane respectively, in the 70s. He used to talk about sunny days in J Ward, where they would bring out all the inmates during a sunny day, and they would promptly line up and start jerking it. In Airedale, they would deal with the jerking off problem by strapping you into cotton mittens. But a lot of the inmates would chew a hole through them just to get a finger out to jerk it with. His worst story, though, was about a psychotic woman in Airedale. She had self-inflicted scars all over her face from scratching herself, self-imposed bite marks all over her body from trying to eat herself, and she had the nasty habit of chewing the inside of her mouth and spitting blood at your eyes and mouth, hoping you'd catch one of the myriad of diseases she carried. That last part sounds very much like a wild animal defense mechanism, like I guarantee there's an animal out there that does that on purpose. Truly horrific to think of a human doing it though. Story 10. I'm not a nurse, but was a patient once. Giant dude got upset one dude changed the channel from a football game he was watching and smashed his skull with his fists. Not fully, but enough that when they brought him back a few days later, he started seizing and had to be removed again. Didn't see him again. Also, there was one lady who was straight out of the movies, walking around preaching the end of days loudly and sweating like crazy. Story 11. This might not fit perfectly, but I love this story. How about an inpatient addiction clinic? The first one that comes to mind was something I witnessed between a patient and another floor tech. We had a man who was in serious detox. Drug of choice was meth. He was throwing a huge tantrum, not uncommon in DTs. People will do just about anything to get a fix. We weren't locked in a facility, so it wasn't like he was stuck there. He genuinely wanted help, and that's why he stuck around. And we were there to listen and help him through these shakes, hallucinations, and other symptoms. He was slamming his fists on the desk at this point, and he had just started yelling that he wanted some frickin' ice. Slang for the drug. Well, the tech with me was inexperienced, although much older than me, and while I talked to him and tried to calm him down, she went back to our staff kitchen and got him a glass of ice, like frozen water. She brought it out to him and put it in his hand like, problem solved, and the guy just froze with confusion staring at it. The patient and I both realized at the same time she thought he wanted ice, and we just stared at each other and started laughing. He was in for a rough couple of days, but I've never seen someone jump from near psychotic to giggling so fast. Story 12. 60-something old woman would come out of her room every so often at night topless and holding out her saggy breasts, saying in broken English, my nipples, please, for the children." 40-something woman would sneak the shower mat out of the bathroom to put under her bed because she was God, and we were stealing her power by electrocuting her kitty every night. The floor mat apparently stopped this from happening. A severely schizophrenic woman used to tell me that my name was the worst fairy tale lie that she ever wrote in the 2 Bibles for her daddy. When she was angry with me, she would yell at me and say, "Get out of here, fairy tale book, I wish I never wrote you." That same woman attacked some nursing students who were attempting to use tissues over lollipops to make ghost props for Halloween. She didn't seem to like this, and while trying to hit them, was yelling, "You idiots, you can't make ghosts out of lollipops." Again, same woman, but different group of nursing students brought in several pizzas for an end-of-semester party. The woman then walked up and down the tables looking at the pizzas. Then, out of nowhere, she started throwing the pizzas and yelling, "What's this supposed to be, some kind of pizza test?" Just a note, I'm not doing voices for any, mental patients or anything. I don't know, it just seems like in bad taste. Sorry if you like it when I do them. They'll be back for the next one, I promise. Story 13. I'm an RN in Boston in a psych hospital, and I've seen some crap. One of the things I'll never forget was we had this manic guy that had been transferred from another unit because he kept getting into fights over there, and all the other patients were trying to attack him. I was still working nights back then, and at about 3 a.m. he came up to me and said his tooth hurt, and he needed to see a dentist right away. I said I don't have a dentist for him to see, but when the doctor comes in the morning we can take a look. Gave him some Tylenol and sent him back to bed. About 5 minutes later, he came out saying it really hurt and he needed to see a dentist to pull his tooth. Again, I told him there's no dentist, but maybe I can get some more pain meds. In the middle of me explaining this to him, he sticks his hand in his mouth and rips his molar out of his head and handed it to me. Blood starts pouring out of his mouth, but he didn't even seem to notice. After I clean him up and get the bleeding to stop and call the doctor to get him some drugs, he goes, "Make sure you give me that tooth back when I leave. That's my tooth. Don't try and steal it." Frickin' wild stuff. Story 14. I'm a tech at a psych hospital, but I start nursing school in August, so I hope this counts. We had a very tall, heavyset man who swung at a nurse and a fellow tech when they asked him to not stand naked in the door and flashed the whole unit. So we put him in a hold and escorted him to the seclusion room. From there, he tried to strangle himself with his underwear. He had them on his head like a bandana. So we opened the door and took those away. Then he peed all over the floor, did push-ups, and every time he came down, he would slurp it up. Eventually, he got bored of that and began writing on the wall in his pee, then pleasured himself onto the door and said it would be better if he could bang my dead corpse. Eventually, his IMB52 kicked in and he contacted for safety/good behavior. So we opened the door again and he bit me on the hand and drew blood. From there, I got permission to not be involved in the code and a peer swapped me out. I'm assaulted on a weekly basis, and we aren't even an acute care facility. I'm very excited to go PRN in August. $15.38 an hour is not worth it. Story 15. Prison guard here. Guy cut his sack open to let people know he was serious. Don't know about what. Guy 2 cut off a butt cheek or a big part of and threw it at me as I tried to stop him. Guy 3 punched a wall 3 times really hard, bloody knuckles, and told me he punched the devil, cause he was telling him to stab me, but I'm cool, so he told the devil to screw off. Guy 4 pretended to drown himself in a toilet, basically splashed pee on his face and rolled around crying. Guy 5 banged a window air vent and was compliant yet confused when I asked him to stop. Those were the days. Yo, I want to find someone who punches the devil for me. That guy may not have been all with it, but he certainly was loyal. Story 16. Years ago, I was a student nurse doing my psych rotation in a Catholic facility. The nuns still wore habits and the building was something like out of the Dark Ages. I'll skip talking about the line of patients waiting to undergo ECT treatment in the basement, and instead tell you about Maggie. Maggie was a tragic case. She had been on lithium for years, and it really kept her psychotic episodes in check, until it reached toxic levels and could no longer take it. One hot summer afternoon, we heard this banshee screaming coming from Maggie's room. We rushed in there to see what was going on. Entering the room, we are greeted by a scene I will never forget. This late 70s woman is standing on the window ledge, naked as a jaybird, screaming through the window screens at the nuns in the courtyard. "You frickin' penguins are going to burn in hell," is what she said. The poor sisters are scrambling to and fro to try to get away from the ranting madwoman's vicious verbal assault, as we were trying to desperately pull her off the grating. I knew then and there I would never become a psych nurse. Story 17. I've posted about some of these before, but here goes. I'm not a psychologist, but a former mental hospital patient. I'm depressive, but was in a closed psychiatric facility on 2 occasions. Once, this was because I had myself committed because I wanted to unalive myself, and the other time because there wasn't any space in any other kind of clinic. My roommate watched me brush my teeth on one occasion. While I'm doing this, I realize that he's staring at me. I try to ignore it, though. Then I realize he's staring at my toothbrush. He then tells me, "You shouldn't stick your lightsaber in your mouth." Okay then. Another time, there was a former soldier with PTSD that shared a room with me for a few days. I slept with earplugs during this time because he snored. So I only heard this story from fellow patients, and I'm not sure if it wasn't exaggerated. But something close to it must have happened, because I did see the destruction afterward. Guy with PTSD can't sleep, so he goes to the duty nurse for sleep meds. Duty nurse at the time was a major jerk, not because she wouldn't give you meds if you asked. After all, she's more qualified than you to decide whether you should be given something or not, but because she treated you like an 8-year-old when you did ask. And not everyone in that facility had the mental faculties of an 8-year-old. Thank you very much. Anyway, she tells him that he can't have sleeping meds. He should try and sleep without them first. So the guy starts pacing up and down in the hallway. She comes and tells him that he needs to go to sleep and that he's disturbing other patients, but he ignores her. She grabs him by the arm and the guy completely flips, breaks the nurse's arm and tosses her into a wall, beats up 2 more hospital staff and 2 policemen that the hospital staff called to the scene. Then the head doctor of the station gets called in. He was off shift when this happened. He goes up to the guy telling him something about having a drink with an old comrade, and gives the guy one of those plastic medicine things that look like shot glasses, with a massive dose of diazepine or some such. He drinks it and eventually keels over. Again, I don't know if it actually went down like this, but I do know the nurse with the broken arms was fired for mistreatment of patients, and the hallway looked like it had been the site of a serious fight. The staff was cleaning bloodstains the next morning, the handrails had been ripped out of the walls, and another piece of drywall somewhere looked like someone had been thrown through it. I slept through the whole thing thanks to earplugs. Yet another time, there was one of those sliding fire gates that could be shut by pressing a button that would seal off part of the station. a part that was used for daytime activities and no one slept in. During the night, 2 manic patients were wandering around because they couldn't sleep, because that's what happens when you're manic. And one patient shut the other behind the fire door. The patient that was shut in started yelling, "Help! Help!" in this really eerie voice that convinced other patients the place was haunted. One patient took out his dentures and put them in the dishwasher to clean them. When told that this wasn't a good idea, he cleaned them over the water fountain instead. Some of the saner patients, when we were close to getting released, got permission to go watch a movie at the local theater. We came back home at 11 p.m., and as we walked in, someone made a really good joke. So we were all laughing our butts off. Night security guard sees us trying to get into the elevator and comes running. "What are you doing here?" "We're patients from the psych ward." Yeah, we ended up basically getting held by the security guard until some hospital staff came along and confirmed we were who we said we were. We had a lot of fun pretending to actually be insane in the meantime. Asking the security guard whether it was normal to be hearing voices and telling him hotel service sucked in this place. And asking him if this was an airport, and if it was, what time the next flight to Timbuktu would leave, etc., etc. I think he was glad to be rid of us at the end. The hospital staff was not amused. But then this wasn't the first thing like this, because a few of us eventually decided, we're already in the nut house, this is our chance to do crazy stuff and get away with it, because everyone already thinks we're insane. Doctor later told me that this type of behavior is called cathartic mania, might not be the official term, I'm German, hypomania, and happens to be a decent fraction of patients in the process of recovering from a depression. Basically means you show manic behavior for a short period after recovering from a depression. But this goes away pretty quickly. A different time we got to go out, someone else went and told the hospital staff afterward that I had tried to jump in front of a bus. I did no such thing and was feeling well enough that I had absolutely no inclination to do so at the time. I still got 2 hours of one-on-one therapy with the head doctor, who kept telling me that they could only treat me if I was truthful with them, blah blah blah. The other patient eventually admitted to lying, luckily. A girl kept spitting water at me over dinner or splashing me with it. Eventually, I got fed up and dumped a carafe with several liters worth of water on her. Another patient is like, "Hey, wet t-shirt contest." Staff was not amused because they had to clean up the mess. Someone dumped water into every bed on the station, not a little bit of water either, but enough to soak them all. No one ever figured out who it was. I had the theory that this was because whoever had done it couldn't remember having done it, and was therefore unable to give him or herself away. Went to step into some elevator at one point and was frantically waved off by a doctor standing inside. Standing inside with the doctor, I only got one glance as the elevator door closed, was someone who'd attempted to slit his throat but bungled the attempt. From the amount of blood, it looked to me like he should have been lying on a stretcher. No idea what was actually going on there, but that image won't leave my mind in a hurry. Had a woman, married, 10 years older than me, and in there because of postpartum depression, hit on me. It got so obnoxious that the doctors transferred her to a different ward so we wouldn't meet anymore. Boy, this one person had a ton of stories. It's kind of scary to think, though, if you're in a psych ward or something like that another patient can screw you over by saying you did something not good. And the doctors will just be inclined to believe them. And because you're in the psych ward, they're less inclined to believe you. That's kind of freaky, not a fan. Story 18. Not a nurse, but have had several stays on psychiatric wards for bipolar. To be fair, on most occasions I didn't enter the wards in the most rational and stable state myself, but what has tended to happen is that even when they bring you back down to earth, you can end up staying for an extra month or two before they let you go. So I've spent some time on psychiatric wards completely sane. If not, maybe firing on all cylinders. Anyway, I've seen a few shocking things. Like a guy cutting open his wrists with broken glass and bleeding out pretty severely, but to be honest, you quickly become desensitized. What tended to leave me speechless, though, was the abruptness of certain behavior and its total incongruence with facial expressions. For example, sitting watching a TV when a 5-foot-tall, 7-stone woman calmly walks over, suddenly lifts the TV up, and throws it into the wall with great force, smashing it to bits. And then calmly sits back down in an armchair declaring that the TV was ruining her painting. She wasn't painting. And get this, she said it was because the TV was making the armchair make her climax. She never even raised her voice. She then immediately asked me, as if it were anyhow related, if I liked Lisa Stansfield.